This video is for parents who took part in the research study titled The Experiences of Primary Carers Living with Economic and Social Disadvantage of Speech and Language Therapy Services for Children in Their Early Years. I've made this video to share the findings of the study so far with you. I'd also like to explain how these findings came about from the information you gave me in your interviews. Altogether, 7 mothers took part in the study. I've used made-up names for everyone who took part in the study to protect your identities. To try to understand each of your individual experiences of speech and language therapy, I looked at the information from your interviews one by one. I started by listening to the audio recording of our conversation and typed up everything we both said. Then I read the typed transcript carefully and made some notes about what I understood from the words you used and the way you explained your experience. My understanding grew and changed over time as I reread and thought about what you said. The next step involved summing up the key parts that stood out as important from your interview. I wrote some summary phrases on post-it notes and strips of paper. This meant I could move them around and organise them so that I could begin to see patterns and arrange the information into categories. When I'd done this for each of your interviews, I started to look at the findings across the whole group of parents. I looked for patterns, similarities and differences in your experiences. By putting quotes from each of your interviews into a spreadsheet, I was able to group together similar or related experiences under headings or themes. The findings from across the whole group are organised into 3 main themes. The first theme is making sense of your child's speech and language difficulty. There are different experiences grouped under this theme, and I'll give an example of a quote from one of your interviews to explain each one. Because everyone's individual, not every experience described will be true for every parent. But as you'll see from the range of quotes, all parents experience some aspect of this theme. So the first aspect is noticing differences between your child and other children's language. And there's a quote from Kate that illustrates this. So they're all like 2 weeks either side of each other, and they'd all started to talk and make noise and do things that my daughter wouldn't do. Another aspect is experiencing development checks as tests which your child has failed. And this is illustrated by a quote from Beth. She had obviously the development check, and she near enough failed everything in that. Another aspect that came under this theme was believing your child to be falling behind based on your knowledge and experience of typical development. And here's a quote from Lottie. We had concerns because he wasn't hitting those milestones with his speech. Many of you mentioned that you experienced family members as trying to reassure you and themselves that all is fine. And a quote from Nicola illustrates this. I don't know, they just didn't like the idea at the time. It was a bit like they brushed it off, like, no, there's nothing wrong with her. Many of you expressed feeling worried for your child, both for now and for the future. Rebecca, her quote says, quite worried, like upset, probably stressed as well. Some of you expressed that you worried that your child's difficulty was somehow your fault or that you could be blamed for it. Here's a quote from Elizabeth, and at the same time you question yourself as a parent and think, what have I done wrong? Many of you also were looking for a reason or diagnosis for your child's difficulty. Quote from Megan here, you've got to understand what the cause of it is to try to make things better. And finally, Some of you said that your understanding of your child's difficulty changed over time. Another quote from Elizabeth here, but eventually, and the more time went on, I just started to wonder if they'd go down the autism road. The second theme is speech and language therapy as an unpredictable journey. You described experiencing several obstacles in the journey. One thing that many of you expressed was not knowing what to expect. So Rebecca said you were worrying, and the unknown of not knowing what I was going into and what my son would have to do. And many of you experienced mixed emotions through the journey, generally feeling optimistic but also quite anxious, so as illustrated from this quote by Beth. Some of the obstacles you experienced involved difficulties in getting referred to the service. Megan's quote illustrates this. I've been raising concerns from when he was 18 months, but they kept kind of getting brushed off. Another obstacle was long waiting times. Kate's quote here. So that was I think we were waiting about 22 months for speech and language. And some of you experienced unacceptable decisions made by the speech and language therapy service, illustrated by Elizabeth here. And then out of the blue, it was like, oh, we're discharging your son now. And I thought, hang on a minute, there's no way he's at a stage where he can be discharged. Things that help you to move through the system, one of the things was your knowledge and experience. So a quote from Lottie illustrates this. I know what hoops to jump through, if that makes sense, but a parent starting from scratch wouldn't have a clue. Another thing that helped was having support from others. Another quote from Lottie here illustrates this. And that teacher I'm actually really good friends with now. Even now, she doesn't work at the school any longer. But if it wasn't for her interventions, I don't think my son would have got the help. And finally, another thing that helped was being assertive. And a quote from Kate illustrates this. She says, keep pushing, don't ever give up, and become a nuisance, if nothing else, be a nuisance. And there was a feeling that that's what you needed to do in order to move through the service. The final theme is roles and relationships. This is divided into 3 parts, which are all related. The first is your relationship with the speech and language therapist and how you experience that. Under this, many of you expressed wanting to be heard and listened to, illustrated here by Kate. As lovely as they were, there was never an opportunity. They never said, have you got any questions? How do you feel about it all? Another aspect was how important trust was in the relationship, and you had different experiences of trust between you. Beth's experience was they always turned around and said that as soon as they could assess her properly, they would, and to be fair, they have. Another aspect of the relationship was the importance of feeling comfortable and being treated with respect and care. And Nicola's quote expresses this. And he can be quite a shy child, but he didn't seem bothered in the slightest. So they obviously made him feel quite relaxed and happy in doing what he was doing. So yeah, I was quite happy with it, to be honest. And finally, many of you expressed fear of being judged. Again, another quote from Nicola. I did kind of think they'd be like, well, you're just not teaching her properly at home. The next aspect is being in the role of a parent of a child having speech and language therapy. One of the things that came through was many of you expressed wanting to be involved in the speech and language therapy, and you had different experiences of this. Lottie's quote illustrates wanting to be involved more. Had no phone call or anything, just to say, right, today I've been to see your son and we've done this, this and this, and you can work on this, this and this. That to me is bringing the family into support. And another aspect was experiencing having to act in a certain way when your child was being seen by the speech and language therapist. Beth's quote illustrates this. It was a bit stressful because it was kind of, I suppose, like, do I let her get down if she's had enough? The final aspect was looking at the speech and language therapist's role and wanting the speech and language to share their expertise in different ways. Firstly, you were wanting the speech and language therapist to explain your child's difficulty. Rebecca said, they know what they're talking about. They know they've got an idea why they're not talking, whereas the parents, they're just dependent on them. And if they don't give them feedback, they're not really going to know. Another aspect that you wanted more of was the speech and language therapist to share resources for you to use at home. Megan said, if we knew what they were doing in there, we could obviously try and do more of it at home. More information what to do at home would obviously have been a lot better. And finally, many of you expressed you wanted the speech and language therapist to see and work directly with your child, or you valued the speech and language therapist seeing and working directly with your child. And Elizabeth's quote here expresses this. I felt a little bit disappointed because I understand obviously they couldn't see you face to face, but it just would have been nice if they could have done like a video appointment, just so they can see for themselves what I'm saying. These findings are not yet final. I'd love to know your views on whether I've captured what's important to you about your experiences of speech and language therapy. If you would like to make any comments about the findings, please follow the link to the short survey that I've sent you in the information sheet. Thank you again for taking part in the study and taking the time to watch this video.